Hello friends and welcome back to Silverhawk Farm. We are back in my kitchen today. Finally, it's been a minute since I've done a cooking video and I'm very excited for it because today we are making salsa. I have done a little bit of canning this year, but not as much as I would have liked, and despite my constant neglect, we have quite a few tomatoes that are producing. I was going to take some shots of me picking the tomatoes, but it's like 105 degrees outside. So I'm not going to put my camera through that or be out there any longer than I need to. So these are the tomatoes that I grew. You have to trust me on it. So today we're going to be making the tomato jalapeno salsa from the all-new Ball Book of Canning and Preserving. This is what it looks like. I really enjoy this book. It's got a lot of really easy recipes and kind of like charts and things like that to make it a little more accessible. And the tomato jalapeno salsa you can find on page, why isn't this numbered? 163. And basically it's got a lot of like kind of really easy like small batch recipes. We're actually going to be doubling this recipe today. This is 4 pounds of tomatoes. The recipe calls for 2. And so for the ingredients here, we've got tomatoes, we've got onions, we've got jalapenos also from our garden, garlic from my friend Cooper. Thanks, Cooper. The limes, well, I have quite a few more limes. We're going to be using fresh lime juice per the recipe. You don't want to switch out bottled lime juice recipes for fresh lime juice because sometimes fresh limes can have a lower acid content. So the recipe calls for fresh lime, so we're using fresh lime. I'm not entirely sure that I have enough fresh limes to last the whole recipe, so it is safe to add commercial lime juice in addition if it calls for fresh lime. So it's okay to go from, if the recipe calls for fresh, it's okay to use bottled. If the recipe calls for bottled, it is not okay to use fresh. That's the rule. I'm going to be making 1/2 pint jars because that's what the recipe calls for, and it's going to be nice for some like smaller servings of salsa. Usually I prefer pint jars, but I think this will be a nice small batch recipe. And so I've got my produce all washed and ready to go here. So normally I would be using my stovetop canner for like a water bath recipe. You definitely don't need an electric canner or a pressure canner for this recipe, but it's really hot outside, and the nice thing about this electric canner is that it really doesn't heat up the kitchen. I promise that I will make a water bath canning recipe on the stovetop eventually. Today is not that day. So today I'm going to be trying out water bath canning in my electric canner, which I haven't done yet actually. I've only been pressure canning in it, so I'm excited to try that out. So I've been following the canner's instructions. I have put water in the water bath canner, and then I've also put the jars inside, filled about halfway with water so that they're not moving around in there and that it's got plenty of water for now to heat the jars. Once the jars are heated, I will use boiling water from my electric kettle to cover and make sure that the jars are covered by 1 inch once we finish the canning process, and I'll show you that. So I'm going to go ahead and get the lid on this and then get the jars warming, and it'll be time to dice some tomatoes. Right, so next thing to do is prep our ingredients and get everything ready to go. It doesn't have us peel the tomatoes in this recipe. The default for canning with tomatoes is to peel them. Because it doesn't call for peeling in this recipe, I know that it's safe. So I'm going to be using this strawberry corer to get the cores out, and then we're just going to be dicing them and getting them added to our pot to heat up a little bit all together with the rest of the ingredients before we add them to our jars. Take a strawberry corer, and then all you're gonna do is push it down into the core. I like to do it from a few different angles so you're not like aggravating it. Grab a bowl so that you can feed these cores to your chickens. If you don't have chickens, they can go to compost. You could probably do something with like preserving or dehydrating them, but that might be a little extra for some folks. And then once they're all cored, I'm gonna get everything diced. So now that I have my tomatoes, garlic, onions, and cilantro all cut up and set aside, I'm gonna go ahead and juice these limes and then fill it up to 1 cup if I am short with this store-bought lime juice. So we're going to just use this handy tool. I just do a cut in half. And I figured while I was doing this, I could talk a little bit about acidity in canning, because I feel like that's one of the things that's a little bit more confusing. It feels more like scientific or technical, but it's honestly very simple. So basically just acidity is one of the things that prevents bacteria from growing inside canned goods, which is why some things are safe to can in a water bath canner, which is just a big pot that you put enough water to be above the jars by 1 inch, versus a pressure canner, which is a specific piece of equipment that needs to be able to come to a certain pressure and hold it. And the main thing about that is acidity. So high acidity things such as salsa, jams and jellies, because they contain so much sugar, those sorts of things you can get by with water bath canning. Other things you need to pressure can. So the acidity in this, it comes mostly from the lime juice. Tomatoes are acidic, but they're not acidic enough to be canned on their own in a water bath canner. So I'm just gonna use this little juicer device. You could totally, if I didn't have this, I would just use whatever strainer I have and just squeeze it. You might get slightly less juice that way, but it'll be fine. All right, so we have all of our veggies and things combined into this pot. It brought it to a boil and then simmered it for 5 minutes. And so this is nice and hot. My jars are still in the canner, staying warm. Ooh, that's hot. You shouldn't touch the top of that. And so I'm going to go ahead and just grab the jars out, get them filled, get the lids on, and start the process. If you were not using a digital canner like I am, it would work exactly the same. You would heat your jars in the pot, just like I did. And then once they're nice and warm and you have all of your fillings prepared, grab them out with your canner grabby thing. This is one of the very few tools that I consider to be essential to canning. I'm sure you could do it without it, but I would burn myself for sure. I'm gonna fill a few at a time so I'm not getting in my own way, because I am canning quite a bit. And that'll also help keep the jars nice and hot. So what we're gonna do is fill each jar, and then we want a 1/2 inch headspace. So I have my headspace measurer guy here. 1/2 inch is the second notch up. And then I have water that has been boiling on standby to fill the tops of these, to make sure it gets to the right headspace. And I have 10 jars ready in the canner. This should make 12 of the 1/2 pints. So I also have this extra jar that's a pint jar just handy. This is one of my chipped ones. This is good use for a chipped one. I'm not actually canning this. I'm using my plastic lid. It's gonna go in the fridge and I'm gonna use it within the next week. Just like normal. I wish everyone could understand how good my kitchen smells right now. Like, it smells so good in here. It's ridiculous. Now I'm just tamping it down to make sure I get any air bubbles out before I determine the headspace. And adding a little more to any that seem especially low. All right, so we've got everything filled, we've got the correct amount of headspace, and I just need to grab a paper towel with a little bit of vinegar on it, and I'm gonna wipe off the rims of these to make sure it gets a nice tight seal. So this is just white vinegar. The vinegar isn't absolutely necessary. It doesn't need to be canning vinegar. That's just a coincidence. It's not absolutely necessary for this recipe. I would highly recommend it in any sort of recipe that uses fats. I've gotten in the habit of always using vinegar, but I learned that from making bone broth. You definitely, with something that contains fat like a broth, always want to. This is pretty water-based, so wiping it off with just a wet paper towel would also do the trick. But we just want to make sure there's no food particles or anything along this rim that's going to prevent it from sealing. Then I've already cleaned these. The way that canning lids work is this is not reusable. You cannot reuse these. You use them one time and then you can use them for like storing stuff in the fridge, but you cannot can with them again. And then these actually are reusable. So sometimes you'll have packs like this and that will only have this lid, and that's because you can, once you have used a lot of jars, you're gonna have a billion of these. So I've got those nice and clean, and then we've got the rims there, and I'm just going to gently center it on the jar. So the way that you want, the amount that you want to screw it in is called finger tight, and you just want to screw it on so much that you're not really having to push a ton with your muscles. Like, you don't want to grip it too tight because it can actually cause the seal to buckle. But you want it to be firm enough that it's gonna hold, obviously. I was so nervous about that the first time I canned, and I found that there's like a wide range of strengths that like actually works. You don't want to do it too tight, and I feel like it's probably understandable to want to screw it on tighter than it needs to go because you're trying to get the seal on. So, you know, more force must help, right? Oh, this has a dent. This is, okay, this is good to see. This I'm reusing and it's got a dent right here. So I'm not gonna use this. I'm gonna put this to this. I'm actually gonna throw this away so I don't accidentally use it again because I've got a billion of them. I'm gonna throw this away and I'm going to find a different one that's a little newer. Carefully placing this onto the trivet and the canner. If you're using a pot to water bath can, I would still recommend a trivet. Basically, it's just a thing that lays flat along the bottom of your pot and allows bubbles to circulate so that your jars don't get broken in short. The risk if you don't have a trivet is that the extra agitation from the boiling can break your jars. And then one thing you can do is use your canning tool to make sure that you've got that full inch of headspace. So I'm going to put this at the top of the jar. That's right at an inch. I'm gonna add just a touch just in case it goes a little bit low. You don't want any to boil off and make it so that it's no longer an inch covered. Oh yeah, that's good. And then we're gonna put the lid back on. This goes down. If you happen to be using the same pressure canner that I use or the digital canner that I use, you do not use this with the water bath canning. This stays to the side. We do not use it at all during this process because it'll block and create pressure inside. We don't want that. So it's on filled jars right now. I'm gonna go ahead and hit play, and then it's automatically gonna start heating and will cook for 15 minutes. So if you are using a water bath canner, which this recipe is made for, I've adapted it for this, you are going to want to Fill your jars. Make sure you have that inch of headspace, and an inch and a half doesn't hurt. 1 to 2 inches is where you want to be. Bring that to a rolling boil, and then once it's at the rolling boil, you start the timer. This will can for 15 minutes at normal elevation. So if you have a different elevation, you need to consult the charts and stuff on that. Thankfully, I live at normal elevation, so I don't need to worry about it. And so this is going to cook for 15 minutes, or it's going to heat up, it's going to do the rolling boil for 15 minutes, and then it'll cool down a little bit and allow me to bring it back out. You always want to use something like a towel to set it back down on, because the cold counter can shatter glass. So always be conscious of that. So I'm going to let this run for a little bit, and I'll see you in a few minutes when I have some lovely jarred salsa. I'm also going to get this put away, and we'll be using that within the next few days for cooking and meals and all of the wonderful salsa things. So not a bad thing to have a little bit of extra. I would definitely rather have extra than have too little and not be able to fill all the jars. All right, so I am so excited for the final part. This is my favorite part, when you pull it out and it looks all official, and then it makes the little poppy noises, and it's my favorite part of canning. So basically, this has gone through the whole process. It came up to a boil. It boiled for 15 minutes, and then I believe it did like a 5-minute cool down before it let me open the canner. And I'm just going to use my tool here to very carefully grab jars. So I'm keeping this really, really flat as I'm laying it down. And as you see, there is water on the top of the jar. It would be tempting to grab that with a towel or just tilt it a little bit so that it falls off, but that can actually impact the seal. So I promise you that water is gonna evaporate in no time. It won't be a problem, but you don't want to do anything to get it off right now. The main priority for you right now is getting the seal. I can already hear them popping. This last guy right here. And that's it. I am going to leave these completely undisturbed for 12 to 24 hours. I usually err on the side of 24. After that, they will stay good for a very long time. I would imagine that these won't make it to next summer. Most of the time, the red tomato salsa is one of the first things we run out of, which is why I'm trying to get this done kind of early. Well, thank you so much for hanging out. Oh, the pop! It keeps interrupting me. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today and making some salsa. I hope that you have enjoyed, and if you are preserving tomatoes, please let me know how that's going for you and what you're excited to make. I am really looking forward to doing some more cooking videos. Really looking forward to doing more cooking videos here in the future, so please let me know if there's anything you'd like to see. And thank you so much for hanging out with us here on the farm today. I hope you do something for yourself today and eat something delicious. Okay, bye.